The Korean War. The Korean War is going to start as a Cold War conflict between communism of the Soviet Union and the democracy of the United States and Western Europe. It will unleash our policy of containment, where we wanted to contain communism to where it was and not allow it to spread. Korea had been a colony of Japan since the Russo-Japanese War in 1910. In 1945, the United Nations will divide Korea at the 38th parallel. North Korea would be occupied by Soviet troops, and South Korea would be occupied by American troops. The Soviet troops wanted to keep the Koreans from participating in free elections where they would decide on reunification. The Soviet Union will set up a communist government in North Korea, and the United States will set up a democratic government in South Korea. The North Korean dictator that will be put into power will be Kim Il-sung, and he will be equipped with a strong military supported by the Soviet Union. By the 1950s, Americans felt that communism was getting stronger throughout the world. In 1949, communist takeover in China had strengthened those fears of Americans. And American spies had reported to President Truman that Stalin was using places like Burma, the Philippines, and Korea as communist bases. American politicians believed that communist countries were acting together in order to spread communism, meaning that China and the Soviet Union and its eastern satellites were working together. Truman felt that with China falling to communism, other countries around her would continue to fall in communism, toppling like dominoes. This is often referred to as the domino theory. Korea had been divided at the 38th parallel by the United Nations. In 1950, North Korean communist forces will cross the 38th parallel and invade South Korea. The United Nations will promptly recommend that UN members furnish military assistance to South Korea. The UN Army will consist chiefly of American and South Korean units, but other countries will send units as well. Initially, communist forces were pushing deep into the territory of South Korea. However, soon after American reinforcements arrive, that will change. When Douglas MacArthur arrives in South Korea, he quickly pushes the North Korean forces back across the 38th parallel and almost reaches the coast of China. Communist Chinese armies will cross into North Korea and attack the United Nations forces. This will compel General MacArthur to retreat. By mid-1951, the battle line had stabilized again at the 38th parallel. General MacArthur did not see eye to eye with President Truman, and Truman will actually dismiss General MacArthur in 1951 for insubordination. Truman had believed that MacArthur had disregarded orders too many times, mainly because they disagreed over the actions that should be taken in the Korean War. MacArthur believed that they should take the Korean War all the way to China and proposed plans to drop about 50 atomic bombs on China in order to force them out of the war. He wanted an all-out victory over communism in Asia. Truman feared that an invasion of China and into Manchuria would spring a war with the Soviet Union that would actually end us in a nuclear war and destroy the planet. Because remember, we had enough nuclear weapons to kill each other like 10 times over. Truman wanted to keep the war in Asia limited so that not only did he not have to pull forces from Western Europe and leave Western Europe unguarded, but he also did not want a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. Peace talks will begin in 1951, but intense fighting will continue to rage on. Peace talks will take almost 2 years because both sides could not agree on how to exchange prisoners of war. The communists of North Korea wanted all prisoners returned to North Korea, but the United Nations claimed that many of these North Korean prisoners of war did not want to return to communist North Korea. Finally, the conference will agree that all prisoners will be given the freedom of choice, and eventually 2 out of every 5 prisoners will refuse to return to North Korea. The war will end in essentially what is considered a stalemate. The dividing line of Korea will still continue to be the 38th parallel, although the Americans will claim a victory because we contained communism to where it already existed and prevented it from spreading. Although the United Nations will hail the Korean War as a victory against communist aggression, it was criticized by the South Korean government because it failed to unify the country under an anti-communist regime. The end of the war was greeted by most Americans with relief because it cost the United States $18 billion, 103,000 soldiers were wounded, and 33,000 soldiers were dead. Many people will agree with General MacArthur and saw President Truman as weak because he did not seek an all-out victory in Korea. Those who did not want the war with the Soviet Union wanted to see the frontier of communism pushed back in Asia. Secretary of Defense Allen Dulles will set up a series of anti-communist alliances. Most famously will be SEATO, SEATO, or the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, which was formed in 1954 and included Australia, the Philippines, Thailand, and Pakistan. CENTO, CENTO, or the Central Treaty Organization, will be formed in 1955, which will include Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Pakistan. The goal of these organizations was to help the United States and Western Europe with their goal of containing communism to Eastern Europe. The Soviet Union will continue to fight proxy wars in the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, and again in Southeast Asia with Vietnam. The United States and the United Nations will continue to send forces to back up the policy of containment and prevent communism from spreading.